You won't believe what happened in today's story.
The house greeted him with silence. Not the calm kind, but the thick, suffocating quiet in which even the sound of his own heartbeat seemed too loud. The old beams above groaned in the wind, and in that groan was something almost human, a note of pain. He stepped into the dining room, and that was when he saw the drop. Dark red, heavy, it fell from the ceiling onto the white tablecloth, blooming into a spreading stain. Another followed, then another, blood, fresh, unmistakable. His head tilted upward. A damp circle was spreading across the ceiling boards as though someone had spilled an entire vessel above. But he knew that room upstairs, empty, untouched. No one should have been there. The drops gathered faster, a thin stream trickling down to the table, striking the vase of dried flowers at its center. The brittle petals darkened, curling inward as though recoiling from the warmth of the liquid. He stumbled back, and that was when he noticed the photograph. It lay near the edge of the table, half-burned, its edges charred and curling. The image was faint but visible, faces. At first glance, just another family portrait. Yet the longer he stared, the clearer it became that the eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at him. Half the photo was destroyed, leaving only a white scar where one face should have been. But beside it, in the shadowed corner, a profile remained, strangely familiar, foreign and intimate at once. Then came the smell, metallic, sharp, like rust and wet fabric. The blood kept dripping, now steady, falling directly into the heart of the tablecloth. A door slammed upstairs. He froze. No one should have been there. Footsteps echoed faintly above, or was that only his imagination? He strained to listen. Nothing except the relentless rhythm, drop, drop, drop. On the tablecloth, the stains had begun to form shapes. At first random blotches, then almost letters. He squinted, breath caught, but just as quickly the lines blurred, dissolving into formless red smears. His hand shot out, seizing the charred photograph. He needed to climb the stairs to find the source, but his legs refused. It was as if the house itself was holding him still, and deep inside something whispered, "Don't go up, don't look." The wind rose outside, howling against the windows. For a fleeting instant, a shadow passed across the glass, or maybe it was nothing. The house held its breath, and with it, so did he. Part 2: The Locked Room. The cousin arrived without warning, stepping into the house as if it had been waiting for him. His presence was a shadow that stretched across the dim hallways, carrying the faint smell of tobacco and old wool. They exchanged uneasy greetings, words stiff and clipped. No one mentioned the blood upstairs. It was as though acknowledging it would make it more real. Night came with a heavy sigh. Rain tapped against the windows, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed almost conversational. The house felt smaller, the walls pressing in, and then the scratching began. It was faint at first, almost polite, like a cautious hand rapping on wood, then louder, deliberate, coming from the old study at the end of the corridor. He froze. "That room hasn't been opened in decades," he whispered to his cousin. "Not since grandfather locked it." His cousin's eyes glinted in the lamplight. Maybe it's just the wind. But the wind did not scratch. The doorknob rattled as if someone or something was turning it from the other side. He took a step closer, then another, heart hammering, every nerve taut. The keyhole stared back at him like a dark eye, unblinking. And then a whisper. Not words exactly, just a hiss, a breathy exhalation that came from behind the locked door. "Leave, now," it seemed to say, or was it merely imagination? He shook his head, trying to steady himself. The cousin leaned closer, voice low. "Maybe it's just the house settling." But no house settles like this, no house scratches like this, no house whispers like this. The scratching escalated, nails on wood, something or someone trying to get out or in. He reached for the doorknob, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Metal cold against his palm, the lock stubborn. He tried again, nothing, then. A loud bang echoed from inside, a solid, heavy strike, the kind of blow that makes your teeth ache. The cousin's face went pale. "We shouldn't." But it was too late. A shadow flickered beneath the doorframe. Thin, elongated, impossibly fast, and then silence. The scratching stopped. The house exhaled. They stared at the locked door, two breaths held tight, waiting for what would come next. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering against the roof in a relentless drumbeat. Inside, the house waited, patient and secretive. And somewhere deep within, the locked room hid its truths. secrets that were meant to stay buried, secrets that smelled faintly of old blood and dust. He knew one thing for certain: whatever was behind that door was not just old furniture or forgotten papers, it was something alive, watching, waiting. Part 3: The Stench in the Walls. The house had begun to smell. At first subtle, a faint, sour tang that lingered in corners, almost imperceptible over the scent of wet wood and rain. But as night deepened, it became unmistakable, the thick, cloying odor of rot and iron. He followed it through the hallways, each step careful on the creaking boards. The smell guided him to the far wall of the main corridor near the old sitting room. He pressed a hand against the wallpaper. Cold, damp. The pattern of roses and vines seemed to ripple under his touch, unnervingly alive. And then he found it, a faint draft, almost imperceptible, seeping through the wall. He knocked, hollow. Unlike the rest of the structure, this section gave way. Heart hammering, he pried at the paneling. The wood yielded with a groan, revealing a narrow cavity within. His stomach twisted as the stench intensified. Inside, bundled and pressed against the back of the wall, was a piece of fabric. Dark, stiff, soaked through with a liquid that glinted in the lamplight. Blood, old, dried, but still disturbingly pungent. He recoiled. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were aware of his intrusion. Fingers trembling, he reached inside, touching the fabric. It left a streak of sticky red across his palm. The coppery scent filled his nostrils, almost choking him. A memory flashed unbidden, a childhood tale whispered by his grandmother about rooms where things wait and breathe in silence. He shook his head. Superstitions, yet the hair on his arm stood on end. From somewhere above, a slow drip echoed, not the dining room, closer, inside the walls themselves. He pressed his ear to the paneling. A heartbeat, no, too irregular, something shifting, sliding within the cavity. He stumbled back as a soft whisper came from the wall, faint but distinct. "Don't open, don't look." The cousin appeared at the hallway entrance, face pale in the flickering light. "What is it?" He swallowed, trying to speak, but the words stuck. The fabric, the smell, the unrelenting presence, it was more than he could name. "We should leave it," the cousin said, but his own voice trembled. "Whatever it is, it's meant to stay hidden." He nodded, though a part of him burned with need. The house had secrets, and one by one it was forcing them into the light. Yet the walls themselves seemed to push back, alive with memory and menace. A sudden sound made them both jump, a soft scuffing from deep within the house, followed by a muffled thump. Something or someone moved behind the walls, unseen, watching. The stench lingered, clinging to their clothes, their hair, their very skin. It was a warning, or a lure. He realized with a shiver that the house was not just a building. It was a living memory of every betrayal, every secret, every drop of blood that had ever fallen inside it, and now it had chosen to reveal itself. Part 4: The Whispering Portrait. The house seemed to breathe differently after the discovery in the walls. Every corridor felt narrower, every shadow heavier, as though the mansion itself were leaning closer, watching. He found himself drawn to the main staircase, and there on the landing hung the family portrait. A grand, imposing piece, the patriarch and matriarch flanked by children whose eyes seemed too vivid, too aware, painted generations ago, yet tonight it felt alive. At first he thought it was the flickering candlelight playing tricks, the way the shadows shifted across the painted faces. But then he noticed it. One of the eyes, his mother's, gleamed as if wet, not the gloss of varnish, but something fresher, more immediate. A shiver ran down his spine. The air grew colder. He stepped closer. The eye blinked. No, that couldn't be. Paint doesn't blink. He swallowed hard. A soft whisper reached him, barely audible, like breath moving across the canvas. Do you think you should? The words, or something like them, made his throat tighten. His fingers itched to touch the surface. The painted skin was smooth, yet alive under his fingertips, pulsing subtly, impossibly. He stepped back. The portraits of the children seemed to shift too, their mouths curling into faint, knowing smiles. The patriarch's gaze followed him as he moved across the landing, heavy and accusing. The cousin appeared behind him, voice tight. What is it? He couldn't answer. The whisper had stopped, but the sensation remained, that quiet, invasive scrutiny, as if the house itself had chosen a messenger. A faint draft rustled the edges of the frame. The candle flickered violently. He blinked, and for a moment one of the painted faces was gone, just an empty canvas behind the gilded frame. Then it returned, perfectly still, perfectly painted, yet wrong. Something about the arrangement was off. The painted eyes were no longer aligned with their bodies, subtly tilted toward him. He stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. The sound echoed through the hall, sharp and accusatory. He caught himself on the banister and turned to the cousin. "It's not just a portrait," he whispered. "It's listening." From the corner of the room, a shadow shifted. Not the cousin's, not his own. Something moved behind the edge of the painting, stretching just beyond sight. The air grew thick, scented with old perfume and iron. And then the whisper returned, louder this time, clearer. "You shouldn't have come, not yet." The candle guttered and went out, plunging them into darkness. The painted eyes glowed faintly in the dimness, luminous with menace. He felt the canvas pulse beneath his palm, the heartbeat of the house itself. He wanted to flee, wanted to scream. But something rooted him in place, curiosity and terror entwined, drawing him toward the truth hidden in those painted faces. The house waited, patient, hungry. And the portrait waited with it. Part 5: The False Confession. The storm outside had intensified, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the shutters, and yet inside, the house felt quieter than ever. Almost expectant, as if it had been holding its breath for what was to come. He found himself in the sitting room with a relative he hadn't fully trusted before. Their face was pale, eyes darting nervously around the room as though the shadows themselves might report their words. I have to tell you something," the relative said, voice tight, trembling. "Something terrible." His heart stuttered, finally, some answers. He leaned forward, eyes wide, willing the confession to fill in the gaping void of dread that had been building. The relative's hands shook, fidgeting with a ring that glinted in the flickering candlelight. "Years ago, Then they hesitated, bit their lip. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. "I hid it," they continued finally. "Something awful that shouldn't have been found." His pulse hammered. "What?" The relative swallowed, voice dropping to a near whisper. "In the east wing, behind the wall, Before they could finish, the air shifted. A cold draft, scented faintly of iron and rot, swept through the room. The words faltered and dissolved mid-sentence, replaced by a low hiss that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves. He frowned. Something was off. The story didn't settle properly. Details twisted like smoke in the corners of his mind. "Tell me," he urged, voice sharper than he intended. "What is it?" The relative's eyes widened. Another pause. Maybe it's not safe to speak the truth. Truth or lie, the confession had the weight of reality but the shape of deception. He realized with a chill that the relative's words were carefully crafted, half-truths, misleading paths designed to draw him closer to the edge of understanding without revealing it fully. The house seemed to respond. A floorboard creaked behind him, a whisper brushing his ear. "Closer, closer." He turned sharply. Nothing, just shadows clinging to corners, stretching unnaturally. "Why tell me at all?" he demanded. The relative's voice was barely audible. "Because you need to know something is wrong, but not everything. Some things are better left untouched." And in that moment he understood. The confession wasn't meant to free him. It was meant to trap him further, to tether him to the house's dark, secretive pulse. The candle flickered violently, and for a brief instant he thought he saw shapes forming in the shadows, figures crouched, watching, waiting. When the light steadied, the room appeared empty. Yet he could still feel it, the house listening, the relative holding back, and the unsettling knowledge that the worst truths were never spoken aloud. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the house continued its silent countdown toward revelation, every heartbeat echoing like a drum of warning. He realized the confession had changed nothing. It had only widened the darkness, making him see that the house's horrors were not just in what was hidden, but in what was cleverly revealed. Part 6: The Midnight Visitor. The storm had passed, leaving the night slick with rain and mist curling low across the estate grounds. The house seemed to sigh in relief, but he knew better. The air still trembled with something unseen, a presence waiting beyond the walls. He was in the library, staring at the blackened pages of a family ledger, when movement caught his eye. Outside the tall, arched window, a figure stood in the downpour, motionless, watching. Rain ran in rivulets over its head, soaking its clothes. But it made no sound, no footsteps, no movement of the earth beneath it, only the gaze, fixed and deliberate, that felt heavier than any storm. He leaned closer to the glass, heart thundering. There was something familiar about the posture, the tilt of the head, the way the shoulders slumped. but recognition brought no comfort. The figure did not blink, did not move, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. He stumbled back from the window, his pulse raced. The floorboards behind him were dry, no trace of passage, no footprints, no water dragged inside, nothing, yet the chill in his veins insisted it had been real. The cousin appeared beside him, whispering, What is it?" "I don't know," he admitted, voice shaking, "but it was out there, watching." The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, and a faint scratching returned, not from the walls this time, but from the garden beyond. A brush against metal, a tap against stone, something circling, waiting for the night to stretch longer. He thought of the locked room, the whispering portrait, the hidden cavity in the walls, and the half-burned photograph, all threads tugging toward the same knot of dread. The figure outside was another thread, weaving the house's secrets tighter around him. He pressed his forehead to the glass. The rain had stopped dripping, leaving only the faintest mist clinging to the windowpane. The ground was empty, yet the sense of being watched remained, deep and invasive, as though the house itself had sent a messenger to remind him, nothing here is accidental. A sudden creak drew his gaze upward. Shadows shifted inside the library, elongated and dark. The air grew thick, almost tactile, smelling faintly of iron and wet earth. He turned to speak, but the cousin had vanished. The chair they had been sitting in was empty, its back damp as if someone had just left. And then he heard it, a soft, almost intimate whisper drifting from the direction of the garden. "You can't leave, not yet." The night pressed closer, suffocating and cold. The house had extended its reach outside the walls, into the very darkness surrounding it, and he knew, with an icy certainty, that whatever had appeared at the window would return. He was no longer merely inside the house. The house was inside him. Part 7, The Forbidden Letters. The morning after the midnight visitor, the house was silent in a way that pressed on his temples. Sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like restless spirits. He was wandering through the study when he noticed a stack of envelopes on the desk, sealed with wax. The handwriting was familiar, yet impossible, elegant, looping, unmistakably the style of his mother, but the dates stamped on them were decades old, some even before he was born. Hands trembling, he picked one up. The wax seal cracked with a faint pop, revealing the brittle paper inside. The ink was fresh, impossibly dark, and the words formed sentences he could not reconcile with reality. "Do not trust the eyes that follow you. The walls remember, the blood will speak." He dropped the letter, the paper trembling in his palm as though alive. Each envelope held a message, all written in the same impossible hand, each warning him of dangers that should not exist, of secrets older than memory. His cousin appeared at the doorway, pale and silent. Where did those come from? He shook his head, not trusting his voice. "I don't know, they shouldn't exist." Together they read more letters. The words became increasingly disturbing. Some recounted events that seemed to have occurred in the house long before they had lived there. Others spoke directly to him, predicting actions he had yet to take. The line between past, present, and future blurred with every line. One letter made his blood run cold. "The heirloom waits, its thirst grows with each secret revealed. Choose carefully, or the house will choose for you." The walls of the study seemed to close in as he read. The air grew thick with the scent of damp paper and something far fouler underneath, iron, old blood, the unmistakable tang of decay. He could hear it now, a faint scratching behind the bookshelves, like fingernails clawing for attention. He clutched the letters to his chest. A sense of urgency gripped him. The house was speaking through these letters, guiding him, warning him, or perhaps mocking him. The cousin's voice trembled. "We shouldn't read them all. Some things are meant to remain unknown." But he could not stop. The letters pulled him forward, each one a thread, weaving him deeper into the house's labyrinth of secrets. The past, the present, and the supernatural converged on the pages before him. And somewhere deep inside the walls, the house listened. It had found a way to reach him through ink and paper. Part 8, The Crimson Heirloom. The letters had left him restless, sleepless, and haunted. He wandered through the long, shadowed hallways, the house breathing around him, every creak of the floorboards echoing like whispered warnings. It was in the old cabinet of the library that he finally found it. At first, it appeared as nothing more than a small, ornately carved box, crimson lacquer chipped at the edges, polished to a dull glow. But the moment he touched it, the air shifted. cold, almost wet, brushing across his skin like invisible fingers. The box was heavier than it looked. He set it on the desk and studied it. A small lock, intricate, shaped like a twisting vine. He didn't remember seeing it before, yet something inside him knew it had always been there, waiting. He pressed his hand to the lid. A soft hum resonated from within, low and insistent. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the house whispered, "It belongs to you, or you belong to it." He hesitated. The heirloom was said to bring prosperity, to maintain the family's fortune, its influence reaching far beyond the estate itself. But the letters had warned him of its true cost: blood, sacrifice, a toll exacted in ways the mind cannot fully comprehend. The cousin leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" I think this is what everything has been leading to," he whispered. "The heirloom, the source." The box vibrated beneath his fingers. Tiny scratches appeared along its surface, as if fingernails had traced patterns in the lacquer. The metallic scent of blood rose from it, sharp, clinging. He pulled back, but curiosity, terrifying, insistent, drew him closer again. Opening it was like exhaling into a storm. Inside lay a small object wrapped in crimson velvet. It was difficult to describe, neither fully metallic nor stone, warm to the touch yet strangely heavy, pulsing almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. As he lifted it, a vision flashed before his eyes. Generations of his family, each one taking the same object in hand, faces twisted in ecstasy and terror, mouths open in silent screams. And beneath them, blood, always sacrifice. The house whispered again. "The blood feeds, the air grows. Choose or be consumed." He staggered back. The weight of the object was unbearable, yet he could not release it. He felt its power coursing through him, a dark, seductive pulse. To reject it might break the curse, but at what cost? To accept it, would he still be himself afterward? The cousin stepped closer. "Whatever it is, we need to be careful." Careful, the word felt laughable. He knew that the house would not allow caution. It demanded action, decision, and above all, blood. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. The walls seemed to hum with anticipation. The heirloom had chosen him. And now, in the dim glow of the library, he had to decide whether to take the first step toward power or doom. And the crimson object pulsed gently in his hands, patient, insistent, eternal. Part 9. The Splintered Mirror. The night had deepened and the house had grown quieter, almost expectant, as if the shadows themselves were listening. He wandered through the second floor, clutching the crimson heirloom close, feeling its pulse under his fingers like a slow, dark heartbeat. In the corner of the hallway, a full-length mirror caught his attention. He hadn't noticed it before. The frame was ornate, carved with twisting vines and grotesque faces, darkened with age. Something about it drew him closer, irresistible and foreboding. He approached cautiously, heart hammering. At first, the reflection was ordinary, himself, tired, pale, eyes rimmed with shadows, but then something shifted. The reflection moved slightly out of sync. A tilt of the head he hadn't made, a smile he did not feel. His eyes looked darker, sharper, alive in a way his own eyes could not be. He reached out to touch the glass. The mirror pulsed under his fingers, warm and almost viscous, and then it cracked. Not from his touch, not from any visible force. A thin line ran diagonally across the surface, spreading rapidly, fracturing the image into jagged shards. Yet when he looked closer, the pieces reflected things that weren't there. Rooms he had never seen, faces that no longer belonged to the living, shadows moving independently of light. One shard showed the library, and there, behind the desk, stood the cousin, but his eyes were empty pits, dark and bottomless. Another shard reflected the hallway, where blood was slowly seeping across the floor in intricate, unreadable patterns. He stumbled back, heart racing. The mirror seemed to mock him, showing glimpses of truths the mind could barely comprehend, all splintered and fragmented, impossible to piece together. And then a voice whispering from the shards themselves, low and serpentine. "See what is hidden, see what has been taken, see what will be demanded." The crimson heirloom pulsed violently in his pocket, as if in response. The mirror's shards reflected it too, glowing faintly red, echoing the object's insistent heartbeat. He knew in that instant that the house had no limits. Mirrors, walls, shadows, they were all extensions of its will, and every reflection, every image, was another thread pulling him deeper into its dark design. A sudden crash behind him made him whirl around. The hallway was empty. Footsteps, perhaps, but they echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. He could feel eyes on him, watching from every fractured reflection. The house waited, patient and omniscient, and through the splintered glass he understood the depth of its hunger, not just for blood, not just for obedience, but for his very perception of reality itself. He turned back to the mirror one last time. The shards had begun to shift again, forming shapes, letters, something almost coherent. And somewhere within the chaos he saw it, a faint, crimson outline, his own face, framed by the heirloom, staring back with a warning he could not ignore. The mirror was no longer a reflection, it was a message. Part 10: The Betrayal. The house had grown restless, its shadows longer and sharper, slicing through the hallways like knives. Every step he took felt watched, every breath measured. The crimson heirloom throbbed in his pocket, a dark heartbeat in rhythm with the house itself. He confronted a relative he had trusted implicitly, the one who had guided him through corridors, whispered hints, and shared fragments of family history. But something in their eyes had changed, a glint of calculation, a subtle cruelty he hadn't noticed before. "I need to know the truth," he said, voice tight. "Everything you've told me, is it all lies?" The relative's lips twisted into a half-smile. "Not lies," they said slowly, "just omissions." He felt his stomach tighten. Omissions in a house like this were not harmless. Each withheld detail was a trap, a shadow stretched to ensnare him. "You've been guiding me," he said, "toward something, toward this heirloom, haven't you?" "Yes," the relative admitted, "but it's not just the heirloom, it's the house. The house chooses its own heirs, it tests, it manipulates, it punishes. I've been its instrument." Betrayal washed over him like ice. Every step, every warning, every word of guidance, it had been a ruse. They had steered him into the house's web, carefully threading him closer to the darkness he now held in his hands. The cousin appeared at the doorway, face pale, voice shaking. "It's true." "Yes," he said, bitter and stunned. "Every step we took, every discovery, it wasn't chance, it was orchestrated." The relative's eyes were unreadable. "I did what I had to, survival, inheritance, tradition. The house demands its due." He realized then that the betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. Generations of manipulation, secrets kept and passed down, all designed to ensure the house's power endured. The family had been complicit, willingly or not, in the heirloom's dark legacy. The walls creaked, whispering in approval or mockery, he could not tell. Shadows shifted across the floor as if in celebration, and the crimson heirloom pulsed violently, sensing the fracture, the fear, the opening in his mind. He clenched his fists, rage, fear, and desperation mingled, feeding the house's invisible tendrils. The relative stepped back, knowing he had been discovered, knowing that the game had shifted. "You can't trust anyone," the cousin whispered, voice barely audible. "Not the house, not the family, not even yourself." And he understood, every lie, every half-truth, every careful omission had been part of the test. The house was patient, and betrayal was its favorite instrument. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the house waited, watching him grapple with the truth. And in his hands, the crimson heirloom pulsed, ready to demand the next act in the cycle of blood, secrecy, and legacy.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories.